Hi there, it is Chris with eVelocityLabs, and today we're talking about a subject near and dear to my heart, disaster recovery. We're going to do a walkthrough on how to set up disaster recovery reports for your clients, and we're going to look at the most basic form to start out with, and if you want to do more advanced reports, we'll have some information on that in a separate video. So first things first, we want to go and make sure that we've got our managed servers set up with disaster recovery information in them. And so we come over here, we're going to work on famous names today. They have 3 servers. And so we'll look at each one. This third button with the 3 dots is the DR plan. And so I open it up, we can see we've assigned a role, criticality, recovery order, RTO, RPO. And under server dependencies, we put a note in here that this server requires both FNDC01 and FNFS01 to be online before this one is recovered. And so that makes sense when you look at the recovery order as well. So let's close this out and we'll look at those other 2 servers briefly. And this one's been completed as well. I won't read it all to you, but you can see no dependencies for this server in recovery order 1, which also makes sense. And our file server is recovery order 2, and it looks like it's been completed as well. So now let's go look at how to set up a disaster recovery. We need to make a template. So there's 2 sections to this page. On the left hand side are templates. You can create templates that are reusable in your reports. And on the right hand side you have a default report that's included with Insight. And this just is going to give you one section of this report. So while we're here looking at this, let me describe the report to you. There is what's called the report head. This is the stuff at the top of your report. It's only going to be printed out once. The report core is when we looked at that information for those servers just a moment ago. It is going to report on the backup detail, server information, dependencies, and procedures. And at the bottom, the report tail is actually the bottom of the report. Again, this section will only print once, and whereas the core is going to print for each server. So if each server has different RTO, RPO, and so on, you'll see that repeated for each server, whereas the head and the tail is only going to give you information for the top and bottom sections, and it will only print once. So this would be good for, like, the head would be good for something like an introduction to your policy, something like that. The tail might be good for a summary of your policy. Another way you can use this is if you have a set of recovery instructions that is the same for all of your servers, rather than detailing that in each server, you could open this up, and instead of putting specific recovery instructions down here in this bottom box, you could just say C section Acronis, and then you'd include that either at the top of the report in the head or the bottom report the tail, and you don't have to have it print every time. Otherwise, if you import a template into this section, it's going to print every time one of these servers comes that has that there. Okay, so let's create a basic template. I've already named it here, and I did that just by hitting the new template button. So we'll use this one, and let's import some basic recovery instructions. Sometimes, depending on how the website is set up, sometimes you can just copy paste and pull the images in. Sometimes you'll need to save the images. Alright, to make this simple, we're just going to grab some of this. We're not going to grab all of it. We'll grab that. We're going to come back to our template. I'm going to paste this in. In this case, the images come over fine. Just be aware that doesn't always happen. It depends on how those images are stored on their web page. And we'll save this. Now that we've got a template with this information on it, let's go back to Manage Servers. And now we can import that basic template. If we had more, we could choose another one. We can clear it out. And so you can see, and what I'll do is I'm going to show you the advantage of using the head and tail versus this. Save our changes. Let's suppose for a moment that all these servers used StorageCraft. So let's go ahead and import the basic template again. We'll save it. Pulls in the basic template. And now we'll go and we'll create a report, and you'll see how that's going to be repetitious, where we might not want to do that every time. But you've got the flexibility in how you create the report we're going to use the included default recovery report design. We've got the one template, we just imported it into our 3 different managed servers. Now we just need to create a report. So we'll go to My Company, Reports, and let's create a new report. We'll call it DR Plan for Famous Names. Let's set our time zone. We're going to do this just for famous names. I'm going to send it to my email address. We want to choose the disaster recovery plan. We'll just leave this as is because we're just going to send it right now. Okay, so our report has been queued. So let's go through our report. I've pulled it up for us here. We can see it's pulled up the client name at the top of the document, so we know who we're looking at. We can see the first server, what its role, the information that we had filled out earlier on that server. Backup detail. This is going to show you where the backups are stored, what program is being used, if it's being backed up by multiple servers or multiple programs. They'll all show here. On this server we had no dependencies. And the recovery procedures, this is when we imported the template. So you can see what we imported has just been brought in. And then we'll get to our second server. And these are put in order based on recovery order. So recovery order 1 was the first one we saw. This is the second one, which was our file server. Again, the information we entered on the managed server. Information about the backups, where they're stored, what server is managing the backups, what program is in use, no dependencies again. And here's what I mentioned earlier. We can see the server has the same recovery instructions pulled into it. And now we get to our third server, recovery order 3, and the information that we described earlier. This time we do have some server dependencies listed. We'd entered that on the managed server page. And for the third time we've got this recovery environment pulled in. That's exactly the same. And we'll get to this, and that is the end of our document. So what could we do differently? We're going to get a little more advanced here now. We're going to take those instructions out. Let's continue on, assuming this is StorageCraft we're using for these 3 servers. Let's go clear out the instructions on each one. That's all we're going to change for these. We don't really need it if they're identical. We don't need this every time. Really, you'd want to use these blocks if you have information that's unique to that server. Maybe it has its own program. Maybe there are some tweaks or changes you need to make in the recovery process. That's what you'd really want to use those for ideally. Okay, so let's create a couple of some other templates that we're going to use with a more advanced report. Let's create an introductory section. And let's create a summary section now that we've created an intro. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to turn on the head section. We'll import our intro. And we do need to give it a label. Just a description, whatever you want to call it, is fine. That's all we have. We could add another section below. So if we wanted to add more directly below this, which we do this time, we're going to bring in our basic template, which was the same recovery instructions that were imported 3 times for our 3 different servers last time. We just want it once. We're going to leave all these sections turned on in the core, and let's bring in our summary as well. We'll turn that on. We'll bring in our summary, and let's save this report. So one thing we can do, I want to point out as well, is we can set a default report, which will be for any client. So if you go in and you created a report to be sent, it's automatically going to try to use the default report. You can also create a report specific to a client, and I'll show you where to turn that on. We're just going to leave this one for right now, famous names, but the default switch is here. So if I turn this on and I send a DR report to any client, this by default would be the report design that they would get. It would have their servers in it. However, in this case, it would have our crafted intro and summary that we made for famous names, which we wouldn't want that to be the case. Okay, because this is not the default report, we need to go put this on our client, so when we send a report to famous names, it knows which report it's sending. Otherwise, it will use the default report, which is what we did during the first exercise, and we want to use this one that we've customized. If we change this report so it's default, we won't need to do this step. It'll just send to any client. However, we don't want to do that. We created a custom intro and a custom summary for our famous names company. So let's make sure this report only gets sent to them. We do that by going to the clients. Let's go to famous names. We'll check disaster recovery report because we want to use a specific report. And we choose our famous names DR report. We'll save changes, send it. Okay, so I've brought our report in. You can see we've got the introductory section now. Below that, we've got our recovery instructions. We only see that once, and now we get the information we have on our servers for recovery. What we should do in this case is we'll go back, we'll rerun this report with recovery instructions that says, we'll add in here C StorageCraft recovery instructions at the top of the document, something like that. And this is our summary that we created for famous names. Let's make that one change and we'll come back and send another report. Okay, we've made those changes. Let's resend the report. All right, let's see if those changes took effect. So we can see here now, just see the instructions at the top of the document. And instead of having the instructions printed for each server, since they're the same, we just put a note in here. And we know we use the instructions we put up at the top for each one of these servers. Keeps it a more concise document. So let's do one last review. Just want to compare the document to the report that we have here to the design that we created. All right, so we had two sections. We had the intro, which you can see is all the way down to there. And then our report had a second portion that we added into the head section, which was the recovery info with our basic template. And we can see that's pulled over. Then we get to our core section, which we had turned on backup detail. Dependencies were turned on, backup procedures. We have the recovery procedures here. Server information is at the top. So we can turn any of these sections on or off, whether you want them or not. Maybe perhaps you don't ever want to use the dependency section for some reason. You can just toggle that off and it won't show up in the report. And then we had our 3 servers total, and then we had our custom summary that we had created for famous names. And you can see it pulled in that all in one document. So you've got it gives you a lot of flexibility in how you set up your report. You can add as many of these sections in the head and as many sections in the tail as you need. You may want to include instructions that refer to the network as well. So maybe pull in some information about your firewall, maybe your networks, where to find configs, where to restore those from as well. And you can make a pretty comprehensive DR document. And because these are template based, it's very easy to import this stuff into another client. So what do I mean? Well, let's create a new report for our other client, which is Zippy. And in this one, let's just say we want to pull in, or we want to turn on the head, and we want to bring in the intro section. And perhaps we don't really want dependencies, and we don't want a tail section. So we'll save this. Now when Zippy Architects gets their report, they'll have an intro. Maybe this was a generic intro. Maybe it's not an intro that was specific to famous names, but you've got one that you have available. It's kind of generic for all of your clients. You can have that one brought in. You can customize what's available in there for Zippy. And in this case, we don't have a summary. From here, what we'd want to do is go back to our client. Let's go to Zippy. Say, let's use a specific report for Zippy Architects. We choose that, and we hit Save Changes. Now when Zippy has a report that's sent to them, or created for them, it'll use their report design. Okay, so let's send a report to using our Zippy client. So for our DR plan for Zippy Architects, we'll save this. So let's queue up a report. So here we have a report. We had just imported the introductory section from famous names. We wouldn't do this in a real world example. We'd have more of a generic section if you were going to use it across multiple clients, but we did this to demonstrate. And then we've got the servers we set up for Zippy. We turned off including backup dependencies, and you'll see they're not here for this report. We've got our second server, RPO, RTO, backup detail, and no, this is the last page, there is no summary because we did not include a tail on this. Again, you could use the head or the tail in any way you want. Most common for the head would be some sort of introduction or universal backup recovery procedures. In the tail, you might put recovery procedures there at the end of the report instead of at the top of the report if you'd like, or you may use some sort of summary. Whatever you'd like to put there, you can.